Good afternoon, everyone. We will now resume our full council session today, and we begin with item number 7, which is a public hearing. This is a public hearing on Expedited Bill 922, Property Tax Credit, Elderly Individuals and Retired Military Service Members, with amendments. This bill would extend the duration of property tax credit for elderly individuals and retired military service members from 5 to 7 years, and generally amend the law regarding property tax credit. Council action is tentatively scheduled for June 28th. We have one speaker for this item, and that is Mr. Mike Coviu on behalf of the County Executive. I now invite Mr. Coviu to give his testimony, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Council, for hearing us this afternoon. I'll be very brief on this. The packet from Ms. McCartney-Green is very good. This bill extends a tax credit for about 5,000 taxpayers age 65 and up, actually age 70 and up now. These are folks who received the tax credit for the first time excuse me, in fiscal year 18. This current year, which ends in a couple weeks, is the last year of the original term of the tax credit. The term of the tax credit was set in state law. The state just changed the state law so that counties can set the term of the tax credit. We sent over this bill to extend the term for 2 years to give you ample time to make any changes that you might like to do. I would ask you 2 things here. I'd ask you to pass the bill. We have started doing billing for the FY23 property tax bills last Friday. If you could give us a straw vote today, or actually vote on the bill today. I'm not sure that it's possible for you to do that, but we'd like to continue with the tax billing and not have to stop it waiting for the 28th to come, and thereby risking getting the tax bills out late if possible. Again, this affects 5,000 taxpayers who are 65 and over. It's about a $3.5 million tax credit for those 5,000 people.
Thank you, Mr. Coviu, for that testimony. I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director in just a moment, but there are no other speakers for this public hearing, and so this public hearing is now closed. Director Michelson, any thoughts?
Yes, we advertised that there would be action next week, so we're a little concerned about final action. However, if the council wants to indicate how you're likely to vote, to provide some direction to Mr. Coviu so he can move ahead, I see no problem with that, and then having the final vote as scheduled.
We're missing a few colleagues here, but I am going to be supportive of this. Colleagues, without objection, are there any concerns raised by those that are here, present, or virtual? No. Oh, Councilmember Jawando?
I'd like, yeah, sure. I mean, I wasn't expecting, so I'd usually like to dig in a little. On its face, I agree with it and the tax credit, but it's a straw vote, so I think you can proceed with caution, but proceed. That would be my view, but there might be a question or two that I ask you over the next week, so, and you're always very responsive. So.
Yes, please ask questions.
Yeah, right. So at the moment, Mr. Coviu, without objection, I think we are in line, okay. But we may have some questions between now and then.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. Take care.
Terrific. That takes us on to item number 8. This is a public hearing on Expedited Bill 1522, Special Capital Improvements Project Legislation, Authorization Kennedy Shriver Aquatic Center Building Envelope Improvement. I know a lot about this. This bill would authorize the planning, design, and construction of the Kennedy Shriver Aquatic Center Building Envelope Improvement Project in the North Bethesda Garrett Park area. Council action is tentatively scheduled for June 28th. There are no speakers for this public hearing, and so this public hearing is now closed. That takes us on to item number 9. This is a public hearing on Expedited Bill 1622, Special Capital Improvements Project, 6th District Police Station, P470301. This bill would authorize the planning, design, and construction of the 6th District Police Station project in the Gaithersburg area. Council action is tentatively scheduled for June 28th. There are no speakers for this public hearing, and so this public hearing is also now closed. That takes us on to item number 10. This is a public hearing on a supplemental appropriation to the county government's FY22 capital budget and an amendment to the FY 2021 through 2026 capital improvements program of the Montgomery County government in the amount of $909,000 for the Appellate Court Judges Chamber project. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. There are no speakers for this public hearing, and so this public hearing is now closed. Can I get a motion to accept this supplemental appropriation?
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Reamer, seconded by Councilmember Friedson. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous among all those present and virtual. Great. So that is it for our public hearings this afternoon, which takes us to item number 11. These are interviews for the county executive's appointment for the Police Accountability Board. I'd like to invite Dr. Stoddard as the representative of the executive branch to come forward. As he is coming down, I will ask him to make some opening comments on behalf of the executive branch to just provide a little bit of context and overview on the process that the executive branch followed to bring these distinguished members of our community here before us this afternoon. But also thank the executive branch for your partnership on this. My understanding is that you have engaged different stakeholders as part of this process, which we very much appreciate. And we know this was a difficult decision that had to be expedited so that we can meet the July 1st deadline. I'll just note a couple of things on the outset and then go over the logistics here. And that is to say how appreciative we are of everybody who has been willing to step forward. We're sure that there were a number of very qualified applicants to this position, and these positions are critical for so many different reasons, because this is a bridge, this is a link, this is a definitive link with our community to law enforcement, and vice versa, from law enforcement to our community. And we're at a perilous time where we have a record number of vacancies, challenges within recruitment and retention, and we're all trying to meet this moment in history to help address injustices that have been occurring for generations. And so your job is significant and one that we very much appreciate your willingness to step forward to try and help lead our community in so many ways. The way we're going to do this, colleagues, is we're going to ask Dr. Stoddard to make some comments to provide some context, and then I will invite any of my colleagues that would like to make some brief opening comments, and then we have 4 pre-planned questions which will be asked of all of the respective candidates, and we have 3 panels this afternoon, and then each of my colleagues will be given the opportunity to ask a question, but I'll just note, colleagues, that that question has to be asked of every member of each of the respective folks that come before us. So with that, Dr. Stoddard, I'll turn it over to you to make some opening comments.
Thank you, Council President Albornoz and members of the County Council. Appreciate you on behalf of the executive welcoming us over here and considering these nominations before you today. I wanted to give a brief introduction about the process that we utilize to select these nominees. In the beginning, the county executive met with the team and asked, at his direction, to follow really 4 major pillars to this. First, to meet the legislatively mandated requirements established both by the Maryland legislature but also by this council. Ensure that the nominees reflected the diversity of Montgomery County as required by the council legislation, frankly. Identify nominees who possess a strong ability and demonstrated ability to follow procedural justice procedures. And frankly, we wanted to identify individuals who were neither going to approve of police behavior or presume police wrongdoing before policies, procedures, or complaints were reviewed. That was a key desire that we had in this process. The review panel consisted of myself, Mr. Wims, the director of the Up County Regional Services Center, Ms. Ward, the director of the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, and Mr. Dale Tibbetts, special assistant to the county executive. We worked uniformly through all the applications. We received 65 applications. Of those, 58 were fully complete. They had the resume and the cover letter as required. That application process was open from March 30th through April 20th. We would frankly have liked to have had it open longer, but obviously the legislature established a pretty strict timeline of July 1st to have this all process completed. And so I think we've learned some lessons for how we might do recruitments like this or other boards and commissions going forward in a better fashion to get even more applicants. We reviewed all 58 of those applications thoroughly as a group. We all reached a consensus on who the 22 individuals we wanted to interview for the 9 positions were. I think it is absolutely true, Council President Albertos, that there were many more individuals who were qualified than we had time to interview or that we had ability to consider for this Police Accountability Board. So obviously you see 9 individuals before you today, but there are a host of individuals who are equally or just as qualified who we did not accept because we were looking for, obviously we had to narrow it down, but we were also looking for a group that worked together synergistically to offer the goals and objectives that we had before us. Between April 25th and May the 17th, we conducted 30-minute interviews with with 22 individuals. We asked them questions about their knowledge and understanding of the Police Accountability Board and ACC's roles and responsibilities. We asked what skills or perspectives they believe they would bring to the board. We asked about their personal reasons for wanting to serve. We also sought to understand whether they had any potential or perceived conflicts of interest and their ability to make sure that they attended all or a high number of the meetings to make sure that we had a consistent quorum at these meetings. After answering their questions, the candidates were offered the opportunity to ask questions of the panel to understand the process that we were all collectively going to follow, the timelines, as well as sort of any expectations that they could have about how the board will be convened and what their role will be. After completion of each interview, the panel met to discuss and come to a consensus on whether each candidate met the requirements. 14 of the 22 interviewed were fully qualified. We were ready to move them forward. We sat down with the county executive with those 14 individuals, and based on his feedback, we developed a list of 9 that you see here before you today that we believe work collaboratively to offer a diverse and excellent group of individuals for you all to consider. Obviously, we've transmitted those over, and we hope that you find them satisfactory after your interviews today. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. I'll note for the public that we do have the opportunity to explore 2 ex officio members, but we have not been presented name for ex officio members right now. I think understandably the priority was filling the positions as soon as possible among the voting members in this round. But I would like to note that in a subsequent session, conference discussion, there is interest by my colleagues and I in exploring the feasibility of bringing in additional folks to serve.
On that, on that note, we wanted the Police Accountability Board, once seated, to have a role in actually determining who they thought were the appropriate ex officio organizations to be represented. So we thought about that, and I discussed it with the county executive, and he agreed that we wanted them to be a part of the process as well, as we did want them to be involved in future budget determinations and future staffing allocations. We really respect their input in that process as well. So,
terrific.
Thank you.
All right, colleagues, several of you had requested in advance to have the opportunity to make some opening comments, and if you did not have a chance to make that request, you can still make some opening comments if you'd like, but please don't feel pressure to do so by any stretch of the imagination. We have a lot of questions to get through and 3 panels to work through, and we want to make sure we have ample time. So those that have signed up to speak thus far are Council Vice President Glass, Councilmember Jawando, Councilmember Navarro, and Councilmember Katz. We'll start with Council Vice President Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. It has been over 2 years since the tragic murder of George Floyd and the reawakening that has occurred in this country over public safety. And the primary goal of local government and of public safety is to make sure that every single person in our community feels safe. And that is what we continue working toward. And the Police Accountability Board and the Administrative Charging Committee are yet another step in that march toward making sure that everybody feels safe. And this is going to be a good conversation and another step in that process. Thank you.
Came in under budget. Well done. Councilmember Jawando, you are next.
No pressure there. No, I also want to thank each of the panelists here today has put themselves forward. As the Director Stoddard said, or ACA, you keep moving titles. I don't know your title now. ACAO Stoddard said it's a qualified group.
This is really important. We must have trust in our public institutions. We must have trust in those we delegate power to take care of us, including all of us up here, including everyone that's in county government, and certainly in police, where they have unique powers to deprive liberty and to take life in certain circumstances in protection of us. And I'm really proud of the work we've done on this council to pass some of the first police reform legislation in the state and at the county level. And now we're moving forward with another step in that process of rebuilding this trust and making sure that there's community involvement in that. And so I look forward to the questions today and the answers. But it's a really important moment in our history, and we approach it with a very solemn obligation to rebuild and respect the rights of every resident. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Well said. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to thank all the applicants, and especially the 9 that we will be interviewing. It is very true that we're breaking ground here. It is uncharted territory, but I am convinced and I am assured by the caliber of the people who have stepped up to make history here that I think we can find the appropriate balance to keep our community safe while ensuring all of those important issues around equity. I know that it can be done, and so I look forward to the conversation, and I look forward also to seeing how this particular group that was selected truly represents the complexity and the cultural and linguistic needs and components of our county. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Mr. President, for doing it the way that you're doing it for this important board. As we all know, the state didn't make it as easy for us as we would like to have them make it. As we always say, we were flying the plane as we were building it, and we certainly will be under the time frame that they have deemed that it will have to be under. I also wanted to very publicly thank Dr. Stoddard. To me, it's comforting to know that he is involved in this, has been involved, and continues to be involved in this process. This is a most important board. It needs to make certain, we need to make certain, they need to make certain that everything is fair, impartial, and transparent. And they not only do they need to be fair, impartial, and transparent, or so that the public is so very comfortable, they need to do that for the police as well. No one should have to come before this board and feel like they will not get a fair trial, a fair statement, a fair airing. So I too thank everyone who's applied. I thank everyone who's on these panels today, and I believe that we in Montgomery County, though it's going to be a difficult thing to prove, I believe we in Montgomery County can show all of Maryland how this process should take place. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, and thank you all of my colleagues. I know everybody's been very passionate about this. We now invite the first panel forward. I'd like to welcome Alicia Hudson, Kenneth Kellner, George Uberes, and Rudy Logan to the dais, please. Thank you all very much. So we have 4 questions that I will be asking you of all 4 of you. We're going to do this in alphabetical order and then sort of in a staggering format so that everybody gets their option for the first question. So we will start with Ms. Hudson. How will you work to ensure the Police Accountability Board is seen as a legitimate entity to both the police and the community?
Thank you, President Albanese, Chair Albanese. Thank you very much. It is a privilege and an honor to be here before you.
And you don't have to hunch, it'll pick you up if you want to sit straight.
Oh, okay.
Just up to you.
Yeah.
It is a privilege and an honor to be here interviewing for this very important board. And the question, how do I expect to maintain the legitimacy of this board? First and foremost, by adherence to the law. The Open Meetings Act, the ethics rules and regulations that we are required to follow, maintaining professionalism at all times, not just when I'm in the meeting rooms with my other fellow board members, but when I'm out in public. Words matter, and how you conduct yourself matters. I'm here not in a bias format or representing one particular side or the other. I essentially believe, truly believe that law enforcement needs the community and the community needs law enforcement. Figuratively, it's a symbiotic relationship, in my opinion. And thus, I will be working in that animus. And that is how I intend to carry it in my tone and with respect and adherence to the law.
Thank you. I should have said this up front. If you can target around 2 minutes, you don't have to use the full 2 minutes to respond.
Okay.
Ms. Hutchin, you did a great job. Thank you very much. We next, Mr. Kellner, same question. How will you work to ensure the Police Accountability Board is seen as legitimate to both police and the community?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, council members. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity and your time and your consideration and thoughtfulness today. I think it's very important that the committee demonstrate, early on that the board demonstrate through its rules and actions that it is an independent and unbiased and competent institution in how it establishes itself, in the words that it uses, and how it describes itself. And I think that certain core characteristics can be utilized by the board as part of its mission from the very start. A commitment to independence, to leadership, to transparency, to accountability, integrity. But not just those, but also empathy and understanding of what goes on in the community. Pro-equity and anti-racism should be part of its mission as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ubetis.
Thank you, Council President, Council members. I want to echo my peers here in thanking you for your time and your consideration in this confirmation. I think with regards to legitimacy and with the police and the community, there has to be a commitment to first objective analysis and fair procedures on both sides, of course. And so the objective here for the board, I think, is first and foremost to earn the trust of the community and cultivate those relationships between law enforcement and, again, the community itself. I think second, in creating the reports and the policy advice that will be forthcoming, hopefully in our work, that we are able to achieve a more prosper Montgomery County, and I think that happens with being transparent in the work that we do, and to the extent possible communicating what we observe, the trends, our findings, to the extent possible to the community, so that again, that relationship is fostered between us as the liaison, we'll say, between law enforcement and the community itself. And I think lastly, this is the first, police accountability board, of course, and so thinking about that and that framework, understanding that this is a great opportunity for us to kind of set the pace or set the tone, as we've talked a little bit about with some of my peers, and in doing so, maintaining the diversity that the board currently has and that it is, in fact, the voice of the community moving forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Logan.
First, thank you to the County Council for having this interview today. I'm grateful for this nomination. And to answer your first question, I think a large factor in maintaining legitimacy in the eyes of law enforcement and community is cultivating a public outreach program that invites the perspective of residents who have been disproportionately impacted by police misconduct, but also maintaining an objective eye Also inviting perspective of law enforcement who also wish to minimize harm that has been done in communities where our residents have been subjected to the racial disparities in policing. Also, objective analysis, making sure that all of my decisions are driven by information and evidence first.
Thank you very much. This is the second question. Mr. Kellner, we'll start with you. Do you have any experience with law enforcement that may result in bias, either positive or negative?
No, sir. I want to answer this question by saying that, as I told the representatives of the county executive during the interview process, I don't view it as community versus police or police versus the community, but rather this structure is part of our government structure that we hope will be an essential part of the county's public safety mission. I don't approach the work with any type of preconceived or predetermined goals or outcomes other than supporting the mission of the police and the concerns of the community by helping establish the board as a trustworthy and essential part of the public safety system.
Thank you, Mr. Kellner. Mr. Ubitis.
Thank you. The answer to your question is no. There are no biases in my experience. For my background, for a little bit of context, my academic background is in political science, and my research focused on minimizing corruption at high levels of government through institutional means. Professionally, I engage in research day in and day out to analyze information and provide our clients actionable recommendations based on evidence and data, in fact. And so that is my intention here as well as a member of this board.
Thank you, Mr. Ubitis. Mr. Logan.
To answer your question, my father was in law enforcement. He was a deputy sheriff. He was also a correctional officer. I also spent time working in prison ministry. I worked in a youth correctional facility with people between the ages of 18 and 31, working in collaboration with correctional officers, other chaplains of different faith backgrounds. And also, I did a legal internship where I performed objective analysis of youthful offender cases and providing appropriate alternatives to incarceration to the administrative judge of Queens County in New York. Furthermore, I also grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, and unfortunately I've had experience being detained by police, but that in no way shapes my opinion of the kind of general function of law enforcement, but I think allows me to see things from multiple angles and allows me to access a deeper level of empathy and understanding as I strive to make equitable recommendations as it pertains to oversight and building relationships.
Thank you. Ms. Hudson. You did press the button. There you go. Oh. There it goes.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. No. Again, my as you've heard from my colleagues, my answer is also no. I am, however, very keenly aware of incidents which have happened in the county that cause great concern for the community. And I have heard from community residents, both in their public hearing testimony and also out in the neighborhood. I've heard from persons who express their concerns regarding those very incidents. I think it's important for me, in my endeavor, I have worked very hard on behalf of the underserved and marginalized communities, both as an educator, former educator, and an immigration attorney, working to obtain status for immigrant adults and children, and currently as a fair hearings examiner. I have to conduct my cases and also investigate cases and administer my fact-finding in an impartial and unbiased manner. And that is what I intend to do here. As I've stated before, law enforcement is vital, but it must be used fairly and equitably for the betterment of the community.
Thank you for that. Next, Mr. Ubitis, you will get the first question. If appointed, how would you position this role to work on issues related to racial equity and social justice?
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I think as a Latino myself, I know that there is a lot that can be done in terms of social equity and justice. And I think first thing is to recognize the fact that as a Latino, myself and folks like me are statistically more likely to be detained by the police. And so in that framework, understand and strive for a structure of accountability that comes from institutional reform that, again, it builds trust with the community. And with that trust, I think understanding that every case that we get, every misconduct filing, that we endeavor that we do so in an independent way that is, again, establishing a standard process within the board so that we can hold police officers accountable when there is misconduct.
Thank you for that. Mr. Logan?
To answer your question, Mr. President, to research best practices, see what the data is telling us. Where does misconduct most happen, especially where it doesn't need to? What situations are law enforcement put in where we can have more holistic entities address this situation? Where are the racial disparities most glaring? And to reiterate an earlier point, inviting greater community perspective. What would make them feel more safe? What would make law enforcement feel more safe? What are practices that they would like to see cultivated in the community? How would they like to perhaps cultivate more holistic frameworks themselves? And how can we work in tandem with law enforcement to best achieve that? How can we, as a collective unit, cultivate public safety?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Hudson?
Can you please restate the question again?
Oh, sure.
Yes.
If appointed, how would you position this role to work on issues related to racial equity and social justice?
Thank you for that question. And I have to pretty much, I'm in accord with what my colleagues have already stated. And I learned from working as a member of the Police Advisory Commission that this is a multifaceted, complex issue. Improving policing is there's not a one-fix-all answer to the problems. And my colleague, Mr. Logan, has stated very cogently that, yes, data research is crucial. And I undertook that. I worked diligently as a member of the Policing Advisory Commission. I sought out academicians. We heard about the history of policing. We heard about the present concerns that may be raising concerns in policing presently from another academician. I availed myself of going to webinars, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. I've read materials. I completed the academy training, but I am very eager to attend the implicit bias training. We did participate in some of that training, but I would like to go even further with that. I enjoyed and benefited from a webinar on implicit bias training by Dr. Lori Friedel, that she gave for the National Association for Civilian Law Enforcement, Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, and it was very, very informative. And I learned from that webinar that we all suffer from implicit bias, but in policing, it can result in unjust and unsafe policing, her words. And since we all suffer from implicit bias, perhaps implicit bias training will also be helpful for MCPD leadership as they are implementing discipline and promotions for law enforcement officers. I hope that answered the question because I kind of get going, but.
No, you did. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Mr. Kellner?
Thank you, sir. I view this as one of the missions of the board and something that needs to be addressed and considered in every single aspect of its work. How would we position the role? I hope that we can look at the actual system and the rules that are in place. I mean, in my service as a member of the Human Rights Commission, we heard from the police union talking about, my numbers are right, thousands of different of rules and guidance or that many pages of different procedures they have to follow and keep up with. And I think that questions can be asked and answered from the experiences, are these rules working? Are they resolving inequities? Are they causing them? Are they promoting public safety or not? Who is it for? Why was it put in place? Why it happened? And I think that this body will be in a special position to consider some of those questions.
Thank you all. The final question is actually, it's going to be two parts, but they're both pretty straightforward because you were aware of the guidelines with regards to the time commitment and any potential sources of conflict of interest. But just to get you all on the record, can you confirm that you still do not have any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware? And are you aware of the time commitment responsibility for this position, and are you able to meet that time commitment responsibility? We're going to start with Mr. Logan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am aware of the time commitment that this position requires, and there is still no conflict of interest.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ms. Hudson?
I too have to echo Mr. Logan's response because that is also my response. I have no conflict of interest, and I am very aware of the time commitment, eager, raring to go,
Great.
have loads of time. This is very important to me.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Kellner?
Yeah, thank you. I'm aware of the time and commitment and fully committed to the work. I'm not aware of any conflicts. If any questions which should arise, I would certainly consult with the appropriate county ethics officials.
Great. And Mr. Ubedes?
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no conflicts of interest, and certainly fully aware of the time commitment for this role.
Wonderful. Thank you to all four of you. My colleagues will now have the opportunity to ask questions. Councilmember Jawando will ask the first question, and if there aren't any additional colleagues, totally okay. I just want to make sure you all know that you have that right. But once again, just to remind everybody, not only will you have to ask this question of this panel, but the subsequent two panels as well. Councilmember Jawando.
Got it. Locking in. Well, thank you again for your willingness to serve. Thank you for coming forward today. So some of you alluded to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because just to put a fine point on it. If you look at the chart, what this commission is asked to do, and I think you might have referred to it, the fifth bullet is to advise the council and the executive on policing matters, right? Obviously, Ms. Hudson, you serve on a body that does that for the council, that we worked on and unanimously passed here more than a year or so ago now. But under that bullet, available data shows, and some of you alluded to this, that race-based disparities in policing in Montgomery County, including in traffic stops and use of force, are significant. And what do you think are some of the reasons for these disparities? And what do you see the role of the PAB playing in addressing these disparities in policing? We can start with you, Ms. Hudson. Yeah, we'll start there. I'd start you first, I guess.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. What do I see as some of the reasons for these disparities? I have to state from the onset that, again, policing is a multifaceted, complex matter. When addressing issues of concern, we have to look at the data. I worked very hard to get speakers to come to the Policing Advisory Commission that revealed, again, the history of policing. Yes, we do have disturbing roots, and I've mentioned implicit bias, and having attended a webinar and availed myself of the literature and research regarding this very issue, that it can result in unjust and unfair policing, over vigilance of certain populations and under vigilance of others, and that can negatively impact the life of, unfortunately, traditionally marginalized populations. So I'm not going to say that there's a problem with racism in the police force. I have no way of knowing what's in the hearts and minds of anyone. But Implicit bias is a training that needs to go on and continue in intensity. And as I've mentioned, implicit bias training for leadership in police, not just in the police force, but also in the police, Montgomery County Police Department leadership as well, because that they are implemented in making decisions regarding promotions and discipline of officers. I would say that really good work is being done from what I've observed in my work on the Policing Advisory Commission in diversity, and making a conscious effort to diversify the police force, getting more women. I would like to see more LGBTQ members on the force. Trainings being done by LGBTQ. The Citizens Academy, I would like to see more diversity in the trainers for the Citizens Academy. But I do recognize the efforts that the MCPD is making to diversify the police department, and I think that that's very important. I've also heard from, I have to mention, one of the commanders, of a district which is has a high rate of concerns right now, crime-wise, and he is very encouraging regarding community engagement and community policing. I was just wowed by this commander. I'm not going to give his name because I don't want to accidentally misstate what he stated, but it was very encouraging. I think community engagement, community policing are in order and could quite possibly really help relationships between the police and the community, because a community that trusts the police force is more likely to help and assist the police in their investigation of crimes. And a police officer that knows and is familiar with residents of that community is more likely not to misinterpret gestures or statements or movements of community members. I hope I answered.
No, that's fine. Thank you. And I think we're still sticking to the 2 minutes. You were right around there, but
sorry.
Just for the other, I don't want to dominate my colleagues' time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Joanda, for the question. My answer is I think we all realize that, we ask the police to do an awful lot in addressing problems and issues that arise in our community. And, that places them in situations that we wish we could address in some other means, that rather than simply calling the police to solve that problem, who have a certain type of training, who have a certain type of approach to issues as well. And I'm hoping a broader look at some of these issues and problems in the community would address some of that. But, I know it's not your imagination. I mean, this issue clearly exists. I mean, I've been on a police ride-along, and I saw how many successful interactions a police officer will have in a single shift, in a single part of a shift. In just one evening in Silver Spring, dealing with a search of a vehicle, helping someone with roadside assistance, someone calling the police because they thought their phone line was tapped, or a report of someone not answering their front door, the stolen iPad at the library, someone who was being held for shoplifting by store security. This is all one part of a shift. In everyone's interactions, I viewed, as seen as just professional. They had no idea I was a member of the Human Rights Commission, a day's job, etc. There's also no question that every single one of those interactions, the community members, the crime victims, and those alleged to have committed a crime, were people of color. I can't say what that means. It means something, though, in terms of how often they engage and encounter police, more than my personal experiences. I hope that's helpful to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. I think the question you pose is an important one, and in certain respects, it is, I think, what we are here to find out, to work with our police officers in the community to better understand really what is. First, I think it's important to understand police procedure training and protocols for these situations to be able to get a baseline understanding of this is what an ideal scenario is. And from there, understand when and where there are deviations from that. And principally, to your question, why? Why is that the case? And of course, I can, as my peers mentioned, implicit bias, I think, plays an important role. Diversity in the police plays an important role, the extent to which the police is truly engaged in the community. But I think foremost is the trust that exists between the community and law enforcement. I agree that community trust in the police would also facilitate law enforcement's job within those communities. So I think that would be a first step, and I think this Police Accountability Board is itself a good first step institutionally to getting towards that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Councilmember. Unfortunately, racism and bias is deeply embedded within our society, and there's no place in our society, unfortunately, that is immune to that. So sometimes that can show up in law enforcement practices. But specifically to your question about traffic enforcement and the racial disparities that show up there, I can think of a couple of scenarios where instead of maybe a ticket being, given to the driver or an arrest potentially happening, a safety first response could occur in its place. Like if someone has a broken taillight, for instance, help them get their taillight fixed. Maybe give them resources for that. Or if someone has a suspended license, help them get one renewed. Or if someone's driving drunk or someone's passed out in their car, call them an Uber or Lyft, or take them home yourself. So I'm thinking of addressing policing, or at least modifying those practices so that it's more holistic based instead of punitive in those ways, in terms of fine, fees, arrests, and so forth. And also, to echo one of my colleagues' earlier points, or my peers' earlier points, sometimes less is more. Police officers have a lot to do. There are a lot of calls they have to answer. So maybe, for example, by removing traffic enforcement out of the hands of police officers into other entities that can address those concerns that show up on the road, maybe we can eliminate those racial disparities and also afford police officers some relief from the numerous kinds of calls that they often have to answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Council Vice President Glass would like to ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all for your candor and your honest responses in this conversation, and for putting yourselves forward. And one of the most important duties of the Police Accountability Board is appointing members of the Administrative Charging Committee in this system that was set up by the state. And so I'm just curious, from your perspective, what qualities are you looking for when you have to select members of the ACC? And Mr. Kellner, maybe we'll start with you.
Thank you, Councilman Glass. If I get past the stage and I am confirmed, I look forward to working on the issue with my colleagues. From my perspective is a rule, someone who can support and understand a rules-based, evidence-based approach to analyzing these types of factual situations, taking it in without bias, or any type of favoritism to for or against the police. But at the same time, can also take into account the interests of the person or persons involved and views of the person involved with that encounter with the police. So we just don't look at, here's what a rule said and followed the rule. Again, it's hard to come up with a hypothetical situation, but can take into that as part of the analysis and questions of how they're looking at a particular situation in making a decision.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think a lot of that has come out in the various questions that you've had already, and I would I would specify that for that ACC, charging committee, those attributes, again, must be, the value attributes must be ones that are objective, someone that values objective analysis, that demonstrates integrity, and that, again, can evaluate a situation, data, on the merits of that, but also understanding that this is, our objective altogether is to create a more prosperous Montgomery County. And law enforcement is not an enemy, and our position or their position in this question is one that merits just an assessment of that situation to their best of their ability, understanding their own implicit biases and what they bring to the table. I think it's important for members of the committee to understand that first, of course, as we all know, the police is held to a very high standard, and with reason. And I think the same will be of this board and that committee. And so holding to that will be important.
To your question, a committee that has a deep understanding of racial equity and social justice in the imperative to advance that in our law enforcement practices. Someone who holds true to objective analysis, is non-biased, and wants to invite perspective from all who are be directly involved in this, law enforcement and those from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by racial disparities.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass, for that question. And I would have to echo much of what my colleagues have stated here on the panel already. I am in complete agreement with everything that has been stated. And I, too, would seek out persons who are impartial and capable of impartial fact-finding, capable of reviewing data, researching, who have the energy, passion, and interest in doing the work, putting in the time, availing themselves of training and whatever other instructional materials they can obtain to improve our work or to inform our work. And lastly, I would say persons who are able to work in the animus of diligence, diplomacy, respect, and impartial fact-finding. Those would be my key traits. Diplomacy, I think, is very important in the ability to hear and listen, even when the views may be very divergent.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for your responses to those questions, and I thought you all did a marvelous job, so we really appreciate your leadership. We will be voting on this next week. If we have any follow-up questions, we will let you know. Thank you. We now move on to our second panel, and I'd like to welcome Catherine Manning, who will be joining us virtually, Alvin McCrae, Thomas Williams, and Christopher Zatretz. Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate your leadership and your willingness to step forward. Again, similar to our last panel, I am going to ask each of you 4 questions, and we will go in alphabetical order and then sort of stagger it so not everybody's getting the same first question each time. Then my colleagues will have the opportunity to ask questions, and there will be 2 additional questions by Councilmembers Jawando and Councilmember Glass. So, and I want to thank Ms. Manning, who made accommodations to be able to visit us with us virtually. We really appreciate that. So the first question will go to Ms. Manning. How will you work to ensure the Police Accountability Board is seen as a legitimate body to both the police and the community?
Well, first, I want to thank you so much for your flexibility in allowing me to appear by Zoom. I was actually supposed to be traveling with my family, but my twins have both tested positive for COVID. So I'm not traveling, but still not able to be there in person. I also want to thank you so much for considering me for this position. I've long believed that a fair and effective police force with the trust of all citizens is essential to a functioning democracy. And frankly, after watching the hearings recently for the January 6 riots, this has never been more clear to me than it is right now. In terms of working to ensure the legitimacy of the board, I think that the role of this first board is especially important because it'll establish the policies and procedures and precedent. My own background as a lawyer is in working with crime victims. I was at the Justice Department for about 15 years, and in that time, I drafted the policies and programs that established how the department worked with victims in a wide variety of cases, which gave me an expertise in drafting policies that are fair, practical, values-driven, and flexible. I think that the goal when drafting policies and procedures is to give enough discretion in the application of the rules to allow for consideration of the unique issues that arise in a specific case, but with a clear directive on the values and the factors that should be considered as decisions are made. To me, this is essential in assuring that the process and the decisions made are fair and thoughtful and in line with our societal values and goals. I think our county has a tremendous opportunity right now through the creation of this board to build trust in the police force, but also in the county government as a whole. My goal in serving on the board would be to create the policies and procedures that ensure transparency and accountability and fairness, and for the board to use them both now and in the future. And I'm very excited for the chance to serve the county in this way. Thank you.
Thank you. Hope for a speedy recovery among your twins. Mr. McCray, you are next. How will you work to ensure the Police Accountability Board is seen as a legitimate body to both the police and the community?
Good afternoon. I would like to start by saying I thank you for the opportunity to present and represent the county on this commission and board. I tend to rattle, so I'm going to read my statements how I would like to answer this question. I would like to first off start by saying the legitimacy of this board is of utmost importance. But in starting this process, I think it's important for the board to ground ourselves as to understanding our responsibility as individuals and as a group. Then I would believe we should gain an agreement as to what our goals are and be collaborative and thoughtful in our process as we move forward. The second thing I believe that I would do, and we should do as an organization, is work with my colleagues to ensure that we have in place and follow a prescribed process for how we hold our meetings, with them being, first of all, formal in process, with minutes on every meeting. Secondly, it could be a collegial process. We should not be competitive, but should be very friendly in how we work together. Then it should be inclusive, ensuring that all members of the board have input into the process and thoughts about what we are engaging as far as grievances concerning an officer. Once we move from this process, the third thing I would suggest that we establish a working process as to how we hear and evaluate these grievances that come before us, and it should follow a procedural foundation that's built on the following four things. It is inquisitive. We're asking questions to understand what the charges are. Secondly, it's a discipline process. Third, it's very methodical. And finally, it's above reproach. There should be no one that's able to question anything about the process that we took to get to the decisions that we have rendered. I believe the colleagues, their backgrounds, we all have the processing skills to do this, and that our skills individually can be blended together to come with a procedural process that will outline and follow the points that I reference as a foundational approach that we should take. Fourth, it is imperative that we as a group and individually maintain confidentiality on everything that we're dealing with that's before us that requires a decision that affects an officer's life and their family life and the community. Finally, I believe if we deem it's appropriate with you, the county executives, and the council, that our operational process for handling grievances be published so that the public and the police know what our process is for following and making decisions affecting their lives. I thank you for giving me this time.
Thank you so much. Next is we will hear from Mr. Thomas Williams.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Like my colleague here, I tend to ramble also, so I hope you don't mind that I discipline myself by putting it on paper so that I can stay within the time frames. It's been joked that if you ask Chuck, which is what they call me, what time is it, he'll tell you how to build a watch. So I do want to say, just to start out, just to take what Councilmember Katz said, and I'm going to raise him one, because we not only have the opportunity here, with this being fresh and new, we have the opportunity to be the model for the entire state of Maryland, but we also have the opportunity to be the model for these United States of America. So that's the goal that I'm looking for, is that we can make this best in the nation in terms of what we're doing. So in response to the question that you asked, how will you work to ensure the Police Accountability Board is seen as legitimate to both the police and the community? I'm going to say that I look at it from two perspectives, on the front end and the back end, for both the police and for the community. For the police, we must provide transparency by reaching out through communications with the police, whether it's through Zoom or Teams or something where we can get all police officers who are interested in hearing more about this on some of the things and practices that we will find unacceptable. We don't want to put them in a situation where they feel that it's a gotcha situation. The other thing is that we want to be able to explain to them what the consequence management matrix is, so that they'll have a better understanding of that as well. And we want to stress fairness for both sides. This is not a torch and pitchfork witchcraft, witch hunt, I should say, for police officers. There's going to be times when things are going to go in their favor and times when it's going to go the other way. The other side to that is on the back end. We have to communicate any resolved determinations with them, and we can be anonymous about it. We don't have to mention names, but we want to mention situations and circumstances and communicate to them what the outcome was. So this way they are able to get an idea of, okay, this means that I should probably not consider going down that path because I saw what happened to someone else. For the community, I am more of an engagement outreach person, and you'll see that my answers kind of reflect that. For the community, I'm suggesting that we host town hall meetings so that we can explain exactly how the Police Accountability Board will work. In addition to that, be able to tell them when to file a complaint, who and where to file a complaint, update them on the use of force policy, update them on the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, educate certain populations, if not all populations, on the U.S. Constitution's Bill of Rights, particularly as it pertains through the 4th through 8th Amendments in terms of engagement with law enforcement. On the back end, we must provide follow-up on complaints directly to those who have filed the complaint. Oftentimes what I hear is that if someone does register a complaint with the police, they have no idea what the final outcome was. And we also have to identify trends. I'm also a big fan of data. We want to identify what are the trends that are going on so that we can work with the MCPD and coming up with what are going to be the next steps. How are we going to address this? How are we going to move away from that? And hopefully make it a much better police force. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zatratz, same question.
Thank you very much to the council. I think my goal in reviewing policing practices and procedures would be to encourage due process. So I think law enforcement needs to understand that we are reviewing things impartially and fairly, but at the same time, due process is also afforded to the community so that their complaints, they feel that their complaints are being taken in good faith, that there's a robust investigation. That would be my approach.
Thank you. The second question is, do you have any experience with law enforcement that may result in bias, either positive or negative? This time we will start with Mr. McCray. Gotta press your button.
Apologies. From the perspective of bias, I believe I have no experiences of law enforcement that gives me bias, either negative or positive. However, having a brother that is retired Maryland State Trooper, FBI Task Force member, and city police officer, and having a cousin that's a Virginia State police officer, they have shown me that police officers are humans with the same desires and goals as everyone else. They want to do the right thing, and they want to go home at night. Having said that, there are good officers and not so good officers, as we have seen from the news reports across the country and court cases. I cannot judge a police officer any differently than I can judge either one of you for the way you perform your jobs, unless there are facts that have been brought to me that will indicate that they did not perform their sworn duties appropriately. In saying that, doing what I do, my goal is to make sure that when we make decisions and look at what police officers do, that we're looking at them and addressing the fact that if they provided fair and equitable treatment in the way that they perform their services.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
Yes, thank you. My experience.
You gotta press your button.
Oh,
there we
thank
go.
you.
Sorry.
Okay. Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, my experiences are both balanced with both positive things and unfortunately some negative things. Let me preface it by saying that some time ago I read an article. It was an African American police officer who wrote it, and in it he said that 15% of police officers will do the right thing most of the time. 15% of officers will do the wrong thing most of the time. The other 70% can go either way, depends upon how they are influenced. So we have to look at this from a perspective, and our numbers might be different here in Montgomery County, but we have to look at it from a perspective of how do we cut off the officers who do the wrong thing most of the times, and how do we lift up the officers that do the right things most of the time so that they can be part of the leadership. My personal experience with many situations, and I'll just point out a few of them. I participated in discussions with the young men in the Scotland community. I am a member of Scotland AME Zion Church in Potomac, Maryland, although I live in Germantown. But they were being characterized as a gang, and I had conversations with the police department and expressed my concern over where that might lead. I also filed a complaint against officers because of lack of fair treatment in an incident while I was in the Scotland community that I witnessed. I participated in an NAACP brokered meeting at our church between community members and the Montgomery County then Police Chief Thomas Manger, and this was over a 3 a.m. no-knock raid that turned out to be a nolle prosequi. In other words, the district attorney decided, I'm not even going to try this case. So you have to ask yourself, well, why did the police come here in the first place? There were some good things. I helped coordinate the Montgomery County Law Enforcement Gospel Choir's concert at Scotland. I served on the 2nd District Police Advisory Board. I personally submitted a complaint regarding an officer who tried to get me to turn over the insurance papers for my church's van because someone claimed that the van did damage when it was no way it could because the van was parked. This officer threatened me that anytime he saw the van riding the streets, he was going to notify all police officers to pull it over, which I thought was inappropriate. I did go to his superiors, and superiors sort of backed him up, So ultimately, I did give the insurance information, and I worked with the insurance company so that they can fight this. I should not have to have done that. But in even with that, I noticed that there are many good police officers around. Just driving on our main thoroughfares, I've noticed that there are police officers who may have stopped people, and they're all ethnic backgrounds, they're all ages. So I think for the most case, we can say that our police officers are equal opportunity PIAs, a pain in the you-know-what, but they're doing their job, and if they have to stop someone for an infraction, as long as they're doing it within the confines of doing their job correctly, I have no problems with that. Where I do have problems is when somebody over-exerts their authority. So these experiences, just to cite a few of them, they're going to allow me to examine the situations that come up and looking at it from both sides of the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Mr. Zatritz.
No, I try to take a very practical view of policing and government. I think when there are positive outcomes, I think they deserve praise, and when there's misconduct, I think they deserve accountability. So a very short answer, sorry, but no.
Thank you. And Ms. Manning, have you had any experiences with law enforcement that may result in bias, either positive or negative?
I feel I have to say that we are all notoriously very bad judges of our own biases. So while I can tell you that I don't believe that I have a bias, either positive or negative, I feel like in the interests of clarity and transparency, I should just set out what my experiences have been for your consideration. I spent 15 years at the Justice Department, and I worked with many law enforcement officers over that time, although my primary focus was on the prosecution and particularly on the role of victims in the prosecution. I've trained federal law enforcement officers and some state officers, they're not in Maryland, on victims' rights and more recently on effective responses to trauma in the officers themselves and also in the communities that they serve. My next door neighbor is a former federal agent and he's a friend of mine. I was myself once a victim of crime and I had a positive experience with the officers involved. No charges were brought, but I felt supported throughout the investigation process. I've seen officers at their best, thoughtful, empathetic, and seeking justice. I've also, like all of us, seen and been horrified by incidences of police bias and violence. I am committed to ensuring that the board's actions are fair, without bias either toward or against law enforcement, but always seeking the truth, both in individual cases and for the system as a whole.
Thank you very much. Third question is, if appointed, how would you position this role to work on issues related to racial equity and social justice? This time we will start with Mr. Williams.
Thank you. I would look at that by bringing recognition and attention to some of the racial disparities. So for an example, there is racism that is based on hatred, okay? And if we look at the 2006 FBI report on white supremacist infiltration of police departments, I think it's something that we would be well served to study to make certain that we don't have that problem in Montgomery County. There's also racism based on indifference. And one of the things that concerns me, and I'm glad to see that Montgomery County Police are getting away from it, is this broken windows theory policing. And the reason why it concerns me is because it tends to, this was something that took place primarily in African American communities at the time because they were complaining of a lack of presence of police. And it seems that the pendulum has swung all the way in the other direction. And now a lot of those communities are over-policed, primarily because it's easy to make your statistics. And sometimes you will arrest someone at random because you can potentially get away with it. So I would want to look at this situation from a perspective of fairness, that we are making certain that when an arrest is made, that the officer involved, or for that matter, the department, is doing so in the best interest of the community and those who may be involved. One of the things that in the Scotland community, there were many who felt that the labeling of the young men in that community as a gang was because the Montgomery County Police Department was interested in getting federal funding for fighting gangs. Whether or not that's true, I have no data or no information about that, but these are the types of things that we have to look at finding a way to address. My interpretation of the word racism is when prejudice or prejudging meets up or combines with power. You have the power to do something based on your prejudgments, and to me, that's racism.
Thank you. Mr. Zatratz.
I think it's important for the board to interrogate so-called race-neutral policies and practices, or colorblind policies or practices that nonetheless have disparate impacts on marginalized communities. So my goal would be to identify those areas and try to mitigate those disparate impacts and eliminate them. I think in contemporary policing, it's going to be pretty rare that you find an overt discrimination policy, but I think the board should be tasked with reviewing policing practices to mitigate those impacts.
Thank you. And Ms. Manning.
One of the most important aspects of this board is its opportunity to address racial equity and social justice. That's why it's so essential that there is an independent body that is looking not only at singular complaints, but also at trends to identify systemic issues where bias might be playing a role or where the process has a disparate impact on particular groups of people. The essential piece of that, though, of course, is that we have to be both examining the complaints for such issues, and we have to be willing to take action when those issues are uncovered. The board can't be a rubber stamp if it's not willing to see inconvenient truths and take uncomfortable action. There's really no point to it. I've got to say that's why I'm so thrilled to see the incredible experience and commitment of the people who have been nominated today. I feel even more confident than I did going into this this session that by working together we can ensure that kind of rigor and thoughtfulness and a really courageous process.
Thank you. And then the final question I have before turning it over to Council Members Jawando and Vice President Glass. Can you confirm that you still do not have any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware? And are you aware of the time commitments, and are you able to meet those time commitments for this body? We'll start with Mr. Zatratz.
Yes, I am aware of the time commitments and I'm able to fulfill them, and I do not have any conflicts of interest.
Great. Ms. Manning?
Yes, I too am aware of the time commitments and happy to meet them, and I am not aware of any conflicts.
It's my fault, but I did not give Mr. McRae an opportunity to answer the third question. So why don't we complete this, and Mr. McRae will go back to you for that third question. So just on the conflicts of interest and time commitment.
I do not have any conflict of interest, and I'm fully aware of the commitment, and I am most anxious to delve in and make the commitment to do what's right by the citizens to see and the police.
Terrific. Mr. Williams?
Two things I will say. Yes, I am aware. To my knowledge, I have no non-conflicts. I do work currently for the Board of Elections. And I've been told that there is no conflict as far as that is concerned. As far as the time commitment, I am aware of that. I do participate in several other activities, but this will be something that would be a matter of priority.
Great, thank you. Mr. McRae, going back to you for question 3, my apologies, but if appointed, how would you position this role to work on issues related to racial equity and social justice?
If appointed in this position, I look at the issue of racial equity and social justice as being sensitive. When put in the context of law enforcement and how police officers carry out their responsibilities of enforcing the law, it is imperative that I, being on this committee, do several things as far as how we evaluate the situation of what the police officer is doing that causes them to come before us. I think we should look at two things. First, do the officer indicate an understanding of the circumstances pertaining to the individual or individuals they encounter? Secondly, do the officers acknowledge the need for fairness when dealing with situations relative to an individual or individuals, no matter the racial or ethnic background, and all the individuals should be treated in the same regardless of their race, gender? If there is a consistent finding by us, the board, of a trend, I believe it's imperative that we take a perspective and inform you, the county council, and police leadership of our findings, and at the same time make recommendations from the perspective of training, education, and other approaches appropriate that we uncover or find as we're going through this process. I see this position as one that supports the process of improving policing as it relates to racial equity and social justice in all areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. McCray. Appreciate that. All right, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Jawando to ask his question. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all for your willingness to serve. You as well, Ms. Manning. I'll ask the same question. One of the duties, as you saw, is to advise the council and the executive on policing matters. You all have spoken about this in different ways, but I'll ask the same question, and you heard me ask it before, so you've had some time to think about it. The available data that we have shows significant race-based disparities in policing in Montgomery County, particularly in traffic enforcement and use of force. What do you see as some of the reasons for these disparities, and what do you see the role in the PAB in addressing these disparities? And you kind of answered some of those, so you can lean heavy on one side or the other of the question if you feel like you've already said something related to that. Ms. Manning is first.
Thanks for the question. The reality is that racism and implicit bias exist in all of us, but as others today, including Ms. Hudson and Mr. Glass, have noted, when it comes to policing, that is particularly dangerous because police have the power to use force against our community members. And when that use of force is exerted in disparate ways, it defeats the trust of the police and makes our community less safe, both for individual community members and for the community as a whole. Let me be clear that I don't think that the Police Advisory Board is going to solve that problem, but we may be able to help. I hope that through our work, through our commitment to fairness and transparency, that we are able to identify challenges that exacerbate biases and elevate the ways to minimize them, and that would be my goal.
Thank you. And we go on. Mr. McCray.
Yes. In response to your question, Councilman Jawando.
That's okay. That's all right. I appreciate it.
When I first started to look into if I wanted to participate in this commission, I did some research. And as you stated, 68% of the complaints come from traffic stops. When I delved further into looking at that, I found that better than 50% of those complaints were with officers that had tenure over 14 years and age group that was over 45. I think one way that we as an organization is to make recommendations and look at what is the common denominator of those officers that have over 14 years and over age 45 have in common as causing them to be more complaints against them in traffic stops versus the younger, shorter term officer in the organization.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Jawando. Let me first say is that, which I didn't say before, is that I would embrace a requirement regarding implicit bias testing, training for police officers. I spoke with the former commander of the 2nd District once. We had an off-the-record conversation, and one of the things he mentioned, being at Montgomery County, is an expensive place to live. Cost of living is pretty expensive. That it was difficult to recruit police officers, and that the police department was reaching out as far as Pennsylvania and West Virginia to recruit people. My concern with that is that, well, what sort of communities are these people growing up in? What narrative have they heard? I just heard something on the radio on the way in today that when it comes to African Americans, for an example, that there's a tendency to believe that they are more prone to violence. And I think the result is that we get police officers who may shoot to kill, and the defense is that I feared for my life, even though the person was unarmed. There was also, one of the things that was mentioned is that there's a belief that African Americans tend to be able to absorb more pain. So that if you're inflicting pain, you have to turn the dial up a little bit in order to get them to comply. Both of those are obviously untrue findings. So I think we need to do a better job of training our police officers. And like my colleague mentioned, it's not only in Montgomery County, but in the state of Maryland, 70% of all incarcerated people are African Americans. They get longer sentences. In some cases, they do encounter the police on a more frequent basis. There is over-policing that takes place in a lot of African American communities. So those are some of the things that have to be addressed. If I can paint a visual for you, if someone died at the hands of a 10,000 boulder avalanche, more than likely it wasn't the 10,000th boulder that killed them. It was probably the first one. So I would hope that we would look at things from a perspective of what brought you to make this stop of this individual in the first place. Because I think when we look at those very first steps, if changes can be made there, then it won't deteriorate into some of the situations that we have seen.
Thank you.
I had mentioned previously in my statements that I would aim to interrogate race-neutral policies that have a disparate impact. And I think a primary concern for the board should be interrogating the positive and negative aspects of community policing. Community policing aims to increase positive interactions between the community and law enforcement, but this can often have bad outcomes. Often it results in over-policing of marginalized communities. An increased presence in certain communities will do that. I think evidence does show that community policing can deter marginalized communities from attending things like community events because law enforcement is often present at those events, so there's a fear of the police, and community policing can reproduce those effects that it's aiming to end. And I think council has also already acted in this regard. Community policing encourages law enforcement in schools, and we've seen in Montgomery County law enforcement has been removed from schools. So I think further interrogating those impacts. Obviously, community policing encourages diversity in law enforcement. I think that it's important for maintaining the legitimacy of law enforcement, but the research has shown that it doesn't have much effect on the use of force or improving practices of police. So I think understanding that there's positive aspects of community policing, but also there are negative that the board has to address.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for all again for your willingness to serve. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Council Vice President Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all who are here and virtually. And I'm going to ask the same question I asked to the previous group, in that one of the most important duties and responsibilities that you all will have on the Police Accountability Board is appointing the members of the Administrative Charging Committee. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the types of qualities and dispositions you would like candidates for that body to serve. And Mr. McCrae, we'll start with you.
When I think about the individuals that will be selected for the charging committee, I would hope that they will have many of the same qualities that we as members that are on the PAB board, that they are objective, that they are diligent, and that they are committed to doing the right thing in bringing charges for an officer that we have recommended for charges. They should be willing to take into account and have empathy when dealing out a charge, recognizing that it not only affects that officer, but it also affects their families. And in doing that, do not be overbearing in a charge, but make sure it's fair and equitable for the cause or grievance that they're being charged with.
I would echo that. Check your mic. Okay, I'm sorry. I would echo that, that I would hope that they are objective, that they will look at the full picture and not just a small sliver of the situation. So, for example, if you're looking at a case where you are presenting it from the point that it has deteriorated without looking at how did it get to that point in the first place, then I have a problem with that. One of the things that we've seen in this country, and it's somewhat unfortunate when we look at the George Floyd verdict, for an example. I know that there were a lot of people in the African American community that were rejoicing. They were not necessarily rejoicing because they wanted to see Derek Chauvin get punished. They were rejoicing because finally they were feeling that justice was being served. So I would hope that they can be objective, that they will look at all of the evidence, all of the data, and ask probing questions. What caused you to stop this individual in the first place? That's pretty much what I'm hoping to find when we're looking to appoint people to that board.
Thank you.
I would place that priority on experience with fact finding. I think oftentimes half the battle is knowing what you're looking for, and obviously a big issue would be the ability to act impartially and being reflective of the community. I think having a diverse panel of people to review complaints is important.
Thank you.
Ms. Manning?
I agree with all the statements of my co-panelists. I would seek those who are thoughtful and measured and analytical, as well as fair-minded, curious, humble. I think they have to be willing to listen, as well as empathetic, respectful, and willing to learn about the perspectives and experiences of others. And I also think diversity is essential because we're all shaped by our backgrounds, the ways that we move in the world, and the expectations people have of us based upon our appearance and the ways that we present ourselves. Thanks for that question.
Great. Thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. We will be following up with any additional questions, and we'll be voting on this next week. We appreciate your leadership and willingness to serve.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now invite our final panel, which is just one person, and that is Bishop Paul Walker, who has been nominated to serve as chair. Bishop Walker, thank you so much for your willingness to serve. We will ask the same questions that we have asked of all the other panelists, along with the 2 additional questions from my colleagues, but they will all be coming to you and only you in this round, and we appreciate, again, your willingness to serve. So the first question is, how will you work to ensure the Police Accountability Board is seen as a legitimate entity to both police and the community? And again, if you can, around 2 minutes would be great.
Thank you, Councilman Dew. I wanted to know if I can just make an opening statement, if I had time for that.
Sure.
Thank you. Just to quote the American Academy of Family Physicians, negative interactions with law enforcement are associated with harmful impacts on individual and community health. They pose a serious risk, diminishing physical health and mental well-being. Moreover, systemic health inequities experienced by Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color are further exacerbated when they are having negative interactions with law enforcement. I believe the Police Accountability Board must be honest, fair, and clear with its educational and communication attempts to position the work of the PAB to not only address, but to meet head-on the racial inequity and social justice inequities by establishing a safe place for open, honest, transparent, and difficult conversations and decisions. I understand and believe that the totality of our community's citizens are made up of diverse professions and professionals. These professions and professionals include our police. Realizing that our police are our neighbors and fellow citizens will prove pivotal for the PAB's effort to be fair, honest, transparent in all investigations and decisions, while at the same time maintaining our focus of the PAB's founding purpose, which is to embrace the hard reality that there are officers who are negative in their thinking and conduct themselves in an unprofessional manner in communities of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color. As the County Executive's PAB chair nominee, I am confident that my ministry, my professional, and my personal life experiences have matured me into a well-rounded person. And this well-balanced and growing character has been witnessed and recognized by Montgomery County elected officials, civic leaders, religious and community leaders, and activists, as well as those individuals whose lives I have impacted. In closing, this confidence I speak of is fortified by the love and consistent support of my lovely wife, Mrs. Lisa Walker. Gentle lady, gentle councilman, thank you for your time. Gracias por tu tiempo.
Thank you very much, Bishop Walker. I think you answered a few questions in your opening statement, but we're going to ask him anyways. How will you work to ensure the Police Accountability Board is seen as a legitimate entity to both police and the community?
Thank you for that question again. I would accomplish this by presiding or presenting the PAB to both the community and the police as being a transparent and fair-minded board that will conform to the rules of law in thoroughly and fairly investigating all complaints of police misconduct made by its citizens to determine whether or not the evidence supports the complaint of misconduct and bringing that complaint to a justified conclusion.
Thank you. The second question is, do you have any experience with law enforcement that may result in bias, either positive or negative?
Thank you again for that question, Councilman. No, my position and life experiences have developed me into a person who will not allow interactions and situations to discourage, sway, or cause me to prejudge or have bias, negative or positive, toward law enforcement.
Thank you. And then the third question is, if appointed, how would you position this role to work on issues related to racial equity and social justice?
Again, thank you for such a very important question. I would position the role to work on issues related to racial inequity and social justice by doing the following. Number one, form board subcommittees whose focus would be on specific racial and social justice topics. Number two, hold community forums to address specific racial and social justice issues in the community. Number three, form focus groups to learn about thoughts and opinions that police officers have in ways that they can improve community relations. Finally, number four, hold town hall meetings in our communities most affected by improper policing, where the citizens can be heard, where they would experience education on proper law enforcement behavior, and where they can learn the proper and safe way to respond to their individual encounters with law enforcement. Furthermore, this safe place would educate our non-police community on the proper time and place to make their legitimate concerns heard.
Thank you. There is actually one additional question, because you would be the only member serving on both bodies. It's similar to the question that Council Vice President Glass asked, but a little different. I'll get to it in a second. But the fourth question is, can you confirm that you still do not have any potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware? And are you aware of the time commitments associated with this position? Are you able to meet those time commitments?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, I affirm and confirm that there are no conflicts of interest, and I am aware of the time investment and am fully able to comply.
Thank you. And this is the one question that's a little different from the other four. How will you ensure that the ACC members are committed to objective, neutral, and careful decision-making for each case to further ensure legitimacy with both the police and the community?
I would first confirm with the committee members that they have no bias, positive or negative, toward law enforcement and citizens of the Black, brown, indigenous, or people of color communities who are most affected by police misconduct. Secondly, I perform this by encouraging the committee to embrace the fact that the history of bad policing practices are factual in communities of color, followed by reminding them that our community and its citizens are both private citizens and police alike. I would hold them true to the fair and objective pursuit of the truth, no matter how difficult their journey may be, while supporting them in reaching their final decision that would be a result of thorough and accurate investigation that ensures that the evidence supports the complaint of misconduct and brings the complaint to a justified conclusion.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn it over to Councilmember Jawander to ask his question.
Bishop Walker, good to see you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Available data shows significant race-based disparities in policing in Montgomery County. As is mentioned, part of the role of the advisory committee, the PAB, rather, is to make recommendations to us and to the executive on improving police practices. What do you think are some of the reasons for these disparities, and how do you think the PAB can address them or should address them?
And as some of my fellow colleagues have mentioned, this is an issue that, of course, doesn't have really one answer because there are many vines to this tree in reference to that. But I believe that education, communication, and transparency are the right vehicles to move us toward addressing these disparities and these unfair practices when it comes to just your normal traffic stop. For instance, I believe that training on understanding the different cultural ways of communication. Different cultures communicate differently. Some move more with their hands. As you can see, I'm kind of trying to restrain my hands when I talk, but that's one of the things I do over the pulpit. There are others who are a little more vocal in the inflection of their tone. And I think having these officers possibly training and understanding the difference in the communications will maybe lessen the misconception that this call is going bad or somehow non-compliant. And then on the other end, of course, training or teaching through these town hall meetings our citizens on how to encounter or embrace or interact in an encounter of a law enforcement stop, and encouraging them to understand and to know their rights, and to, of course, speak them in a way that does not suggest non-compliance, but in a way that, of course, allows them to express their freedom of speech and their right as a citizen.
I appreciate it, and very impressed with your holding your hands down as a preacher.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Glass.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And your fifth question to Bishop Walker precluded mine, and I appreciate the candor in which you've had this discussion. I appreciate your leadership over the years, and I think it'll serve all of us well as you lead this body. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Bishop Walker. That's it for our questions for now. Thank you so much for participating this afternoon, and I'll just reiterate a couple points that have been made. The neutrality of this position is critical, and ensuring that this engenders trust on all sides has never been more important than right now. And I very much appreciated the thoughtful responses among all of the panelists. I appreciate the executive branch's work in nominating some really outstanding candidates before us today. And we will deliberate, discuss amongst ourselves. And again, if there are any other questions, we'll let you know. So thank you very much, Bishop Walker.
Thank you, sir. Again, gracias por todo el tiempo.
All right. So colleagues, I believe that is it for today. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.